Okay, John Crow, since I can see you clearly, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint? Great. Thank you very much, John. Okay, well, we're going to get started now. So, as I mentioned, we had over 50 people registered today, and I'm really pleased to see that so many of you have taken an interest in the project and are able to join us today. My name is Sally McIntyre, and behind the scenes here are also Kelly Hullington. She's going to be acting as our Zoom coordinator, moderator, and technical support, and Rachel Cloutier, who's going to be our chat room moderator for today. In case you didn't hear the notice, we are recording today's session and we will be uploading it to our website along with this PowerPoint tomorrow. And anything that people aren't able to get covered today, you're more than welcome to send us emails and we'll get back to you and try our best to answer your question or to receive your comments. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that during the course of the of today's presentation, Kelly, in addition to helping anybody with technical difficulties that might arise, will be posing survey questions to the group, and I'll be covering this a bit more. And Rachel will be passing me questions and the like, but depending on the volume of questions, she may need to consolidate some questions just because we are limited for time. Because some of you have limited internet connectivity, we're going to ask everybody to not share your video because that can make it difficult for some people's servers and the like. So if you could stop your video, it might help others in the group to participate more easily. I have kept my slideshow relatively short because I really hope today to focus on initiating the discussion, and I'll get into that a bit more. But to facilitate the discussion, we want people to be able to raise their virtual hand. There's so many people on today's call that we can't actually see all of you at once. So Kelly is going to be looking for you to raise your hand. So I'm going to just go over briefly how you do that. For those of you who've never used that function. So you can see either at the top or bottom of your screen, it might vary, that this symbol here called reactions is what you click on, and it'll give you the option to raise your hand. And if you're uncertain whether or not your hand was raised successfully, just go look at where your name is and your photo, and you'll see if the hand's raised. And after you're finished making your comments and the like, if you could lower your hand so that we don't think you maybe have a second question that you wanted to ask. As well, as I mentioned, Rachel's going to be monitoring the chat room. So if you're not comfortable speaking to the group, or if you want to just contact her to deal with technical issues, you can go again to that same strip and use the chat function. And this is what will come up. The key is down here. You need to look to whom your chat or your discussion and question comment is addressed to. So you can see here in the example, you could be having it go to the whole group, or you'll see the list of all the names of people participating today. So those are a couple of things we just wanted to make sure that everybody understood how to participate effectively. Because we are limited for time, we wanted to make sure that if possible, you keep your questions and comments as succinct as possible. We want to allow as many people on the call to participate as possible. And like I said, you can always follow up at info.mvca.on.ca for additional comments and questions. Because we're in a group public setting, etc., we do want to make sure that everybody is able to express their views, and we know that some of you have very strong views, but to do so in a respectful manner. We do reserve the right if people are abusing others, either verbally or in the chat line, to terminate your participation or to delete your text from the chat room. But we're hopeful today that everybody engages in the discussion in a respectful manner. As I mentioned earlier, we will be doing voting at various points, just informal polls. And you can see here what it will look like. So Kelly will be posting the poll and you'll be able to vote. So you make your choice and then you have to submit it. And usually, depending on the complexity of the question, and they tend not to be complex, we'll give you 10 to 15 seconds to make your choice. And then Kelly will be posting the results of the poll to see how everybody voted on that particular matter. You don't have to vote, obviously, but the important thing I wanted to point out is that we cannot see how you individually responded. So all responses are totally anonymous. As well, these won't be counted towards our analysis for any survey questions posted online. So if you have already completed the survey online or you intend to, this is not duplication of effort. We're just posting the questions here to spur the conversation. So there's not going to be any double counting of responses received today. So as I mentioned off the top, this is being recorded. We will be posting everything tomorrow. So I just want to take another minute or so to explain to you how the rest of the presentation is going to go. I'm going to provide some background information to everybody just to make sure we're sort of on a level playing field with some baseline information about conservation authorities and our assets and our programs and services. And then I'm going to do hopefully a brief 5-minute intro to each of the subjects, the themes that are in the discussion paper. And then what I really hope is we focus on the Q&A and the discussion of the group on these key themes. I'm hoping to make no more than 5-minute presentations on each of the subjects and allow 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the interest in each of those themes, and to have the conversations. So with that, I'm going to get started. I suppose I should ask if there's any questions in the meantime. Anything in the chat? No? Oh. Any hands raised?
Rob L.
Rob, we're going to unmute you. You have a question?
Yes, hi. I have a question. You just mentioned there's a survey online. Is that for us to fill out after this presentation, or has it been open for a while? And when does it close, this survey?
So the survey has been open since we released the documents a week or so ago, and it doesn't close till September 6th. So anytime over the next several weeks, you have the opportunity to complete the survey. It basically covers the same questions that we're going to be covering today, but it provides you more time and space, obviously, to think about your answers. It also has opportunities for comments. So if you want to be more expansive in providing input and the like. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, super. All right. So, so the purpose of the discussion paper and for today is to begin to discuss the variety of issues that MVCA and all conservation authorities across Ontario have basically been asked to contemplate. There's no specific list of questions that the province has identified for us. It's up to each CA to think about within its context what the issues it's facing and some of the challenges and the needs in its watershed, and then to engage with the community in the conversation. The questions that we've posed in the discussion paper are just a selection of some of the things that we need to be contemplating as we move forward in developing a policy document for the Conservation Authority. Many of you may pose other questions or present needs to us that we will need to integrate. So please don't think of the discussion paper as the be-all, end-all. It's just to start to get the discussion going and help us to suss out some of the needs and priorities of the community. Overall, what we're trying to figure out going forward is what is MVCA's niche within the context of conservation and water management within our watershed. And to engage in the community on this so that we can develop this land conservation strategy. Obviously, the discussion paper can't cover everything. You'll find a lot more information in the current state report. If there's a specific subject that you're interested in, please go to that document. And if you think we haven't covered something in that document, or if you feel there's additional information that would flesh out our understanding of the matter, please feel free to share that information with us. So I wanted to begin by making sure everybody understands what conservation authorities are. So we're not-for-profit governmental agencies created by the province. There's 36 CAs across the province, but not in every jurisdiction. It's mostly in southern Ontario and a few in the north, but there's large areas of the province that don't have conservation areas. And in fact, in eastern Ontario, we're the most northerly CA. To the north of us, in Renfrew County, up to Pembroke and the like, there is no conservation authority. Conservation authorities are formed at the request of the local municipalities. And MVCA was formed at the request of local municipalities in 1968. Originally, there were 29 municipalities in our jurisdiction, but post-amalgamations, there's now 11. And those 11 municipalities are our primary funders at MVCA. But we also get funding from user fees and grants and other sources. But it's those municipalities that make up our board of directors. Either they're directly elected people who sit on your local councils, or they're appointed by your municipality to represent them on the board. And after every board meeting, and we have roughly 9 or more a year, we provide an update to the municipalities regarding the activities of the Conservation Authority. So in essence, our focus is to support interjurisdictional cooperation at a watershed level amongst those municipalities on matters identified under the Conservation Authorities Act. So what are those items? So we have a legislated mandate. The first one is to mitigate risks associated with natural hazards. So this includes flooding, erosion, unstable soils, unstable slopes. And we do this through identifying and mapping those hazards. So that's a lot of technical studies that we would undertake and potentially field work as well to identify those risks, and then to model, for instance, floodplain mapping and to produce those maps. And then once those areas of natural hazards are identified and mapped, then we have to put in place policies and manage a permitting system whereby anybody wanting to develop or alter land within those regulated areas have to come to us for a permit. We also comment on planning applications in those areas on behalf of the province. Instead of the province being circulated to comment on natural hazards, we're the agency that's circulated to provide comments on their behalf. We, of course, also own and operate and maintain water control structures. And we also operate a flood forecasting and warning system. So many of you may be on our email list, whereby we're monitoring the weather, like in recent days, and identifying whether there's a potential risk of flooding, and to make sure people in potentially affected areas are given adequate notice to prepare and respond in the event of a flood. So the next area of our mandate is to protect the hydrologic functions of wetlands. So similar to natural hazards, we need to identify where the wetlands are and to map them, and then to develop policies and regulate any alterations or development within those. So just to explain the hydrologic function of wetlands are basically the equivalent of nature's stormwater management ponds. And they also act as infiltration pits in terms of recharging the groundwater supplies. So it's really important when you think about at a watershed level of the hydrologic cycle that we learned about, at least I did in grade 9, where it rains, the water runs off the land, the water runs into the soils and into the bedrock, etc. Wetlands play a really important role in making sure that hydrologic cycle is working appropriately and that we don't get flash floods, as well that we don't, during droughts, suffer, water, rivers, streams, and the like that are lacking flow. A wetland during a drought season helps to supplement base flow within the creek or river. So wetlands are the hydrologic function that they provide is really important, and that's why the province has given us that role to identify, map, and regulate development and alterations within them. The third area of our mandate is source water protection. So we led the development of source water protection plans back a decade or so ago, but now our role has shifted to supporting our local municipalities in implementing those source water protection plans. But those plans only pertain to municipalities that have municipal drinking water supplies. So within our watershed, the only communities that have a municipal drinking water supply are the communities of Carleton Place, Almonte, and Carp. So in those areas, we support the local municipality in implementing the source water protection plan. So lastly, within what people often term our core mandate is the conservation and management of land. So that in the legislation says to further conservation, restoration, development, and management of natural resources. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by acquiring or otherwise managing land for conservation or preservation, and collecting, analyzing, and providing baseline information on water quality on behalf of the province. So we administer both a groundwater monitoring program and a surface water monitoring program. We're the people in the field who are going to collecting the samples and sending them off to provincial labs for analysis. So that in a nutshell is what people colloquially call our core mandate. Before I move on, is there any questions or comments, chats? No? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So I think it's helpful if people get a sense of our budget and where our monies are going. So everything that I've just spoken to today is considered a Category 1 mandatory program and service. So a lot of the questions being posed, though, start to get into areas that are in our regulation are called Category 2 and 3. So they're things that we might do or we might not do as funding allows. And as you'll see over here on the revenue side, you can see that municipalities are only required to pay for Category 1 programming, but they may also contribute to Category 2 and 3 programs and activities if we have a signed agreement with them to do so. So I just thought it would be helpful for people to understand where we're spending our money on what types of activities and where our revenues are coming from. Is there any questions on that before I move forward? We have a question or comment in the... Right. So we have a question about whether or not our core mandate has changed in recent years. So yes, there's definitely been changes in our regulations in recent years. So our commenting authority as it pertains to planning applications has been reduced. Um, as well. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head some of the other areas, but certainly we could follow up and provide more information on that. But I think it's fair to say that our core mandate most fundamentally changed in that with the creation of these categories. It used to be that municipalities would pay for all of these to the extent that funding was needed. The key change that the province implemented is that municipalities now can look at the list of category 2 and 3 programs and services and decide whether or not they want to continue to fund those going forward. So it was a significant change, and that's why I've spent some time letting you know what our core category 1 programs and services are. Is there another question or comment in the chat?
You're just asking if we can post direct messages. I'll just post them from me so that she can.
Okay. There's a question about posting. Let me just see. Oh, I see. Yes. So there was a question, a request that if people are posing questions, that if possible, that people could do it to the whole group so that others on the chat, monitoring the chat line, can see the questions coming in. So yeah, if people are comfortable sharing their questions with the whole group, that would be appreciated by some of the others participating today. Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. So we have a regulation that we need to comply with. There's several requirements that need to be completed by the end of this year. The first one, which was an inventory and assessment of our properties, we've completed, and we've summarized some of that in the current state report. We also need to conduct a needs assessment and gap analysis of our programs and services, and we've been doing that through various program reviews ever since this regulation came out in 2021. So we reviewed our monitoring program, we reviewed our I said monitoring stewardship program. We conducted we completed a watershed plan for the Mississippi River. And these were major pieces of work that took a critical look at those program areas and to determine how we should be moving forward. I have a question here. I'm going to hold this question, Matt, for a moment. Let me get through this slide and then I'll address your question. And then the last requirement for related to today's workshop here is that we need to develop a policy framework to guide the activities of the CA going forward. The regulation speaks to 2 deliverables, one called a conservation area strategy and the other called a watershed-based resource management strategy. Those are quite a mouthful and 2 documents. We're actually going to combine the 2, and for the time being, we're just calling it a land conservation strategy to simplify things for everybody. So if you hear these other terms, this document, this process that we're going through is going to cover both of those. So Matt asked the question, can you comment on septic permits within the watershed? So septic permits are not actually part of our core mandate. That is a category 2 program. And a category 2 program is a program that municipalities in legislation are required to deliver, but they can contract to a conservation authority to deliver that program. So not all the municipalities in our watershed have contracted with MVCA to deliver that program, but where they have, we do deliver that program. It is on a fee-for-service basis, and we do it in accordance with the direction from those municipalities. So I'm just going to continue on now. So just to get some additional baseline information on the table here. So we own 4 conservation areas, but we have 6 conservation areas. So we only own the Milliken Tail, Purden, Palmerston Canado, and 35 kilometers of the KMP Trail. But we lease 2 properties from the City of Ottawa, and one of those also from OPG. Morris Island, for those of you who aren't familiar, is on the Ottawa River. So the riverside portion of the property is owned by OPG and the balance by the City of Ottawa. And then the Carp River Restoration Area is a property also in the city opposite what's currently called the Canadian Tire Center, I think is its current name. And it's north of the highway and west of Terry Fox Drive. It used to be farmland. And when the city approved development of that area, expansion of Canada West, it provided for the restoration of the Carp River. It had been significantly altered over many years to accommodate agricultural practices on that land, and so it's the most recent property we've acquired, so it's now very much a wetland area on the main stem of the Carp River. I have a question here from John. How have municipalities responded to the new rules for funding programs? Very positively. So every municipality in our jurisdiction, there are 11, as I mentioned. I went to every municipality with a business case that identified the scope of services that we were proposing to deliver in category 2 and 3. They debated whether or not they wanted to participate. And ultimately, by the end of last year, all of the councils had decided, at least for the next 5-year period, so commencing January 1 of 2024, to continue to fund those category 2 and 3 programs. So it was very much appreciated by MVCA and our board that our member municipalities supported those activities of MVCA. Those agreements have to be reviewed and renewed at least once every 5 years. So continuing on, as it relates to water control, we own 12 water control structures. Interestingly, most of them do not provide significant flood control. Several of them might provide flood mitigation, but not control. And I'll get into this later in the presentation. None of our facilities are used for hydro, but others on the main stem of the river do generate hydro. Most of our dams are on publicly owned land or easements we have with the Crown. And at minimum, almost all of them require access from some form of municipal or private property to access. These are largely remote facilities, often off the beaten track, and therefore we're crossing other people's lands to operate and maintain and restore them. We do have contracts with both OPG, Ontario Power Generation, to operate 2 of its facilities, and with MNR, Ministry of Natural Resources, to operate 6 of their facilities. So just so you get a sense, those photos show one of our smallest facilities. That's me, my first month on the job at the Mississauga Dam. And then the one on the right is the largest structure that we operate, which is owned by OPG, and this is the High Falls Dam. So the following 2 maps show you where we have these various facilities. So you can see our conservation areas and on this property, but I've also highlighted here some other properties. So in recent years, we've worked in partnership with the City of Ottawa to do a lot of work on the Pool Creek. We also have a property that we manage on behalf of the Ontario Heritage Trust. It was a property donated to the trust several years ago, and we're the property managers for it. Back in the 90s, the feds had funding to buy out properties that regularly flooded. So we acquired several properties in the Cedardale area. And those properties, the cottages were taken down and are now vacant properties. They cannot be built on. And then we also acquired properties from Ontario Hydro back in the day in the Palmerston area. So we also have an agreement with Carleton Place to jointly manage some forest adjacent to our headquarters here on Highway 7. We have a question from Lucy. What is the Heritage Trust property? It's associated with the Appleton wetland, Lucy. Okay, so this next map shows where we have water and erosion control infrastructure. This isn't just dams. You'll see we've identified here, we have snow courses. So these are sites that we have agreements with landowners to visit during the winter months to do snow measurements to help us gauge the amount of volume of water sitting on the watershed that will ultimately melt and come downstream or evaporate, etc. And so it helps us for doing our planning for how we're going to operate and prepare for the spring freshet. We also have several gauges. We have our own, and this is WSC, is Water Surveys of Canada. So we're constantly monitoring those sites. And again, we have agreements wherever we have these monitoring. These are monitoring for a combination of, it could be flow, it could be water levels, it could be weather station type of information. And then most dams, either our own or others, will have some sort of monitoring equipment on them as well. So you can see that there's a significant amount of infrastructure in addition to our dams that we need to be able to access for our water erosion control program. I've highlighted a couple of other facilities. One that we built back in, I want to say the 80s, was the Glencairn Stormwater Management Facility. This actually needs to be updated. It is a flood control facility. And I'm going to go back a slide. This Carp River corridor, we own a couple of kilometers of the Carp River downstream of that facility. And combined, they are the flood control structure that was built back in the 80s to provide initial support and relief to the Glencairn community. Another one I'm going to highlight here is the McLaren Landing Slope Stability project that was done. Again, I think it was in the 70s or 80s. These details are in the current state report if you want to know them. So some easements were taken at that time. We believe most of them have expired, and we're in the process of just confirming if there are any residual easements that we need to clear with those landowners. So that gives you a sense of where we have land interests. Now, when it comes to pressures on the watershed, and I mean 3 watersheds in effect, because we manage not just the Mississippi River, but also the Carp River and the waterfront of the Ottawa River between Iron Prior and Shirley's Bay. These were pressures identified in the Mississippi River watershed when we did the watershed plan back in 2021. So with climate change, we're seeing increased flooding and droughts. We as an organization are managing a lot of assets that are over 100 years old. So we have aging infrastructure. We've seen, increased in algae blooms and potential for harmful algae blooms, certainly in other jurisdictions in Ontario. It's a concern. Our watershed is one of the fastest growing areas, not just in Eastern Ontario, not just in Ontario, but in Canada. So there's tremendous pressure on the landscape and on natural resources and on the watershed water, surface water and groundwater, and that's continuing. And then we've seen an increase in invasive species. This isn't meant to be an all-encompassing list. It's we could add to that. When this was done, we were in the early days of COVID, but there's, you know, been structural changes, economic changes that we've all experienced since the watershed plan was done. And all of these things factor into what we need to contemplate and think about as we're moving forward with this policy document. So just talking about pressures on the land, this map is to help people understand where we think there is the greatest pressure. And we've simply based it upon travel times. So if you look at the distance that somebody can travel from Stittsville, Allamont, Iron Prior, Carleton Place, and some of these other communities, and we've listed more down here, this is how far into the watershed they can get within 30 minutes or 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and 120 minutes. So you can see that these areas, particularly in orange and red, people from all over Eastern Ontario, quite frankly, can get to these areas in an hour or less time. And that's in part because over time, we've been enhancing our road network. You know, we've been dividing our highways, upgrading the quality of the roads. And so I like to say that, you know, when I was first moved to Ottawa back in 1984, 40 years ago, it would take quite a while to get from Perth into downtown Ottawa. But now I can make it in much less time because that's almost a fully divided highway, you know, from Carleton Place onwards, right? Back in that day, you know, I had to think back. Gosh, we didn't have the 416 highway. Was it even divided going into Greenbank, you know? So the upgrades of the road network have facilitated that growth that we're experiencing in this area. I have a question here from Stephen. How is responsibility for water quality shared between the Ministry of Environment and MVCA? Okay, I'll pause to answer this question here. So that's a very complex question, Stephen, just so you know. I don't know how great a job I'm going to do answering it, but MVCA does not really have any responsibility any longer for water quality. So this would be an area that we used to have some regulatory responsibility for, but we don't any longer. So it used to be when we would review permit applications within those hazard areas or wetlands, or when we would look at planning applications in those areas, that we were tasked with considering impacts on water quality and ecological values. That's no longer the case. So we are strictly looking at natural hazards and the preservation of hydrologic values when we look at planning and permit applications. To the extent that erosion is a hazard and also can contribute to water quality, our comments on erosion may imply a consequence on water quality, but it is no longer our mandate to address water quality. The MOE shares in that responsibility with the municipalities, and that would vary depending on the type of planning application. So for example, if somebody came in with a plan of subdivision, it's the responsibility of the municipality to make sure that surface water runoff from that application and that subdivision are going to meet provincial standards. If somebody wanted to come in with an industrial plant and do discharges to the environment, more than likely they're also going to have to obtain a permit from the Ministry of Environment that are currently called the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks. Thank you, Rachel. Our ministries change names every so often. So they would also have to get some sort of permit approval from the province to do that type of application. Okay, carrying on. I'm just going to do a time check here. Okay, so I've already used up over half an hour. So I think we're good. Okay, yes, we're good. Okay, so is there any other questions before I move on to the 5 themes contained in the discussion paper? Nope. Okay. Any hands raised? No. Okay. All righty. Very good. So we're going to get into the meat of the matter now. All right. So the first subject I wanted to cover is the conservation versus preservation. So at a high level, what we're asking is what role should MVCA play in land conservation versus preservation? And so I'm going to take a moment or two to just make a distinction between the two. And there's no fixed definition, but in general terms, conservation speaks to setting aside land and making sure it's managed in a way that to the greatest extent possible, you're preserving those values you want to protect, but you're also allowing other activities to occur. And those activities could be hiking, snowmobiling, ATVing, they could be forest management, could be a wide variety of things. Conservation and how that term's used will vary amongst organizations. Preservation, however, generally speaking, most people would agree that to preserve land is to more or less keep it in its natural state, and in fact, potentially enhance it to make sure or protect it in some sort of way to make sure those features and functions are preserved going forward. We have a comment question here from John. I assume you've contacted the necessary landowners in McLaren's Landing area concerning the easements. We haven't just yet. We're waiting to, it's not waiting per se, but we're going through all the paperwork on our end. And if we see any outstanding easements, we'll be following up with those landowners for sure, John. Okay, so continuing on, the hydrologic function and control, I've spoken to when I was talking about wetlands and how the watershed functions on a hydrologic level. So the question being, do we want to conserve or preserve land for maintaining those functions and controls? And that could include where our dams are. As I mentioned, we don't own all the dams, land around our dams, and not that that's necessary, but are there reasons why we might want to think about owning that dam? As well, the ecological features and functions. So though we don't comment or regulate in our permits or planning comments on ecological features and functions, it still remains part of our mandate. And so the question is, would we want to conserve or preserve land to maintain those ecological features and functions? So I've mentioned, I think, all the current properties we have, conservation areas, dams, and those other various types of parcels. But when we talk about, conservation, preservation, there are others operating in this space. So, for example, there's other levels of government. Municipalities often, when they are negotiating subdivision agreements, for example, will take areas for parkland or as natural hazard areas where they might manage for conservation or preservation use. The county has county forests that they developed over many years. They own over 4,000 hectares of land to this day that is conserved as forest, but managed for active forestry. Of course, there's a lot of Crown land in our jurisdiction in the Northwest. As well, there are some federally owned properties in the city of Ottawa. There's the National Capital Commission, Greenbelt, and campus in the Shirley's Bay area. But then outside of the inlet to Mississippi Lake, there's the Wildlife Reserve. So definitely other levels of government are operating in this space. There's also non-governmental organizations such as MMLT, which is the Mississippi Madawaska Land Trust. They operate throughout our jurisdiction and up into the Madawaska area. There's the Nature Conservancy of Canada, there's Ducks Unlimited, and there's others operating in this sphere. So we're not the only ones doing conservation, and there are other parties doing both conservation and preservation work in our jurisdiction. And lastly, but by no means least, there are private landowners, in that the vast majority of natural resources within our watershed are owned by private landowners who steward their land and maintain it in a natural setting and condition, and have so through the generations. So, and that's not to be underestimated. So at this point, I've finished some of that background on conservation versus preservation. I have a hand raised from John Crow. So if we could unmute John, you had a question or comment, John? We're trying to unmute you, John, just so you.
Oh, how's that?
Great, we can hear you.
So, Sally, one of the overriding questions that I think confronts the watershed at large is climate change adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the question is, whether it's this particular box or another, how does this strategy help MVCA address climate change adaptation? And the reason that I chose to pose it as a vocal question is, it's too much to say in a chat.
Very good, very good. Okay, so a few points, and I won't be able to obviously give a comprehensive response, but I think one of the things we would want to say is that to the extent that we do conserve and or preserve natural resources within our watershed, will make us position us as a jurisdiction and our municipalities to better receive, I'll say, the impacts of climate change. In that, as I mentioned earlier, our forests provide cooling. All of our forests provide cooling. Our wetlands help to provide base flow during droughts. Of course, as well, to the extent that we protect land, we may be able to adjust our water control structures in future to deal with highs and lows and flows. One of the things we are predicting, and that we've already seen, our trend analysis on weather patterns in the watershed, and we have data dating back 100 years, clearly indicates that we're seeing more frequent and intense storms, as well as periods of drought. And so it's a matter of making sure our infrastructure is able to deal with more frequent and intense events. And we've absolutely been seeing that this year. And I can tell you, operationally, we've been out operating the dams every single week. Normally by this time of year, we've put the logs in, we've locked them down, we've jacked them so that they're, as sealed as we can get them. And they would remain like that through to the fall. This year, we've had to constantly adjust to move water through the system. And so the extent to which we preserve our forests will allow them to absorb those intense rainfalls and mitigate flash floods entering the river system. So it helps us by mitigating high flows on the system. As I said, conversely, to the extent that we have wetlands that are able to release and provide slow release of flows throughout the summer months, should droughts occur, that we maintain base flow. And that's particularly important, for instance, in the community of Carleton Place here, that draws its water, and all those in the system who draw their water from the surface water supply. So it's really important that we maintain base flows throughout the system, so that anybody drawing their water from the surface water, be it the individual or at a municipal level have sustainable water that's of a good quality, because of course to the degree that water levels get lower, you're more likely to have suspended solids, you're more likely to have algae growth, etc. So that in a nutshell, I hope that covers most of the points that maybe you were hoping I would cover there, John. Is there any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, so we're going to move into the discussion phase. And so Kelly's going to put up the first question. Although I just realized I skipped the very first question, didn't I? So she's, thank you. The very first question, and I would like to do it if we could, is to find out who's in the room. So Kelly's just going to pop up some questions. If you could indicate what municipality you live in. And that would be very helpful. And you notice on the right, there's a scroll bar. So if you don't see your answer, scroll down. So we're looking for where you live, not necessarily where you have property. Yeah. We've almost got 75% of you who have responded. We'll just give another few seconds here and then we'll share the results so people can see who's all on the call today. Yeah. Okay, you want to share? Okay, we're cutting it off at 27. If you want to end the poll here and share. We've had a comment here that it was very small and hard to read. If you go to the lower right of your screen, you should be able to see a little scale plus minus, and we'll try at our end to make it bigger next time around. But if you want to adjust that, you may be able to see it better for the next question. So as you can see, we have lots of people from the Mississippi Mills area, over 25%. And then folks from Stittsville, yeah, that's great. Let's see, Karen, I'm going to scroll down a bit. And do we have, okay. Well, that's a really nice mix of people. So thank you for doing that. Let's just get the next question up if we could. So we're just interested in seeing if people are representing a particular sector or associate with a particular sector. And this is where if you don't live in the watershed, but own land in the watershed, you can click the landowner box. So we'll give everybody a bit to respond to that. And again, you can use the bar on the right to scroll down. And if you don't see your answer there off the top. Another way you can increase the size of the survey, if you're still having a hard time viewing it, is click on the little square box that's in the upper right, pardon me, of the question itself, and that should make it larger on your screen. You'll just have to remember to click the exit at the end. Okay,
60%, 17.
We're going to give it a couple more seconds here, and then Okay. Great, we're at 75%. So we're going to end the poll and just see. So we have some folks from the agriculture sector and landowners, taxpayers. That's great. And again, it's a nice mix of folks on the line. So really good to see that. So thank you very much. And we have one more question, just so we all know who's on the line. So we're just trying to get a sense as well of who's on the line in terms of age, because at ages and stages, we have different priorities at different stages of our lives. And so it is helpful for us to know what kind of cross-section that there is. So if you could just indicate, that would be great. That was a nice, short, easy one to do. Yeah. Okay, so that's great. So we have a mix, but it's definitely my generation or older by and large who are on the call today. And that's important for us to know and recognize. So that's great. So thank you very much for participating in those polls. So now we're going to get into the polls regarding conservation versus preservation. So Kelly, if you want to pull up the first question. This is not actually supposed to, it says single choice. Yes, this is a single choice one, pardon me. So if you could read through the question, think about it for a moment and let us know what your thoughts are. And remember what you answer on here today. If you do subsequent reading and the like, and you want to change it going forward on your survey, you could, you can't change the survey you've already submitted. But what I mean is if you haven't already completed the online survey and you want to think some more on these questions, you're not beholden to whatever you put here today. These are just to pose to help us get the conversation going. Okay, so it looks like most people think a mix is appropriate. So this is where we get into the fun part, where I'm going to ask the one person who said preservation, because I think it was one or two, if they're willing to speak to the group on why they think we should be focusing on preservation. Does that person want to raise their hand? Do they feel comfortable speaking to the group on this matter? Or putting something in the chat? Okay, that's all right. Does somebody want to speak, raise why they felt that a mix is appropriate? Do I have any volunteers to start the conversation there? No hands up? Okay, and no comments. All right, well, that was short and sweet. So we'll take it at face value then. Again, if you want to submit comments on any of this, anytime between now and September 6th, you can.
John Beats.
Oh, okay, John Beats, you've raised your hand. If you want to unmute.
Yeah, hello, everybody. My view would be a combination where sort of bands of conservation could connect preservation, somehow blended in with a land use plan if it's a larger operation that's trying to be developed for homes and so on. I think the pristine's important, but but by itself, without access to get there easily by people who don't have means, would be a good mix, I figure.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm gonna open it to John Crow if you want to unmute, John.
Thanks, Sally. The larger question for me is one of the practicalities of partnerships. So, I mean, if in fact we can do this in a cost-effective way, I think people would be very supportive of doing both. The challenge is, what's the capacity?
Well, I won't disagree with you on capacity issues. So one comment I would make in response to that is, so as everybody saw early on, the pie charts, et cetera, in our budgets. So we do not have a reserve fund to buy more land, and we'll get into this in the next question. But what a lot of conservation authorities do is when people approach them with land that they want to donate, they will accept the land. Some will screen the land to see if it's something that they want to preserve. Some of them may take the land as potential sites for future offsetting projects. And by that, I mean, if a developer comes in and needs to impact some habitat, and they're asked to provide offsetting, that potentially those properties could be used by the developer to do tree planting or creation of a wetland or the like. As well, some conservation authorities may receive them and just sit on them and allow them to naturally rewild, as it were. And then lastly, of course, they may see them as a site for potential future conservation area and sit on it until such time as they're able to develop it as a conservation area. And this is why one of the things that we'll get into in the next question that we're posing is MVCA doesn't necessarily have to own the land. And I'm very interested in trying to figure out where we should be best positioning ourselves. So maybe with that, unless there's other hands raised on this particular one, any chat, let's move on to the next question. Okay. Oh, you have one question here? So the question is, do we accept land that is offered to us? By and large, no, actually. And the reason being, we don't have any policy around it. We don't have any sort of plan for what we would do with it. And a main objective of this project was, in fact, for us to figure out what we want to do when land is donated, offers of land donations come in, because typically today we will pass it on either to the land trust or the local municipality or Ducks Unlimited or some other organization. And because we don't have a mandate to establish additional conservation areas or to preserve land, we do not take those lands. Okie doke, I'm going to move on to the next question. Oh, did I accidentally slip? No, I didn't. So what I wanted to show here is those other partners, in fact, that I mentioned and that John Crow spoke of. So these are lands that are either in conservation or preservation use today. So you can see by the colors, that there's some federal lands that I mentioned here and down here, but there's a lot of Crown land in the upper watersheds, in both the Clyde, a bit in the Indian, and then in the main stem of the Ottawa River. Lanark County, I mentioned they have properties scattered throughout. It's their jurisdiction. And then you'll see the city of Ottawa has made significant investments over the years, particularly in the Carp Hills area. and in some of the other wetland areas. And they've also collaborated with Ducks Unlimited on some of those properties. And I know MMLT is also in this operating in these areas as well. You can see their properties. So the interesting thing I wanted to point out using this map was that you'll recall that the travel time, most of the pressures are down here, but most of the land that's preserved and conserved is up here. So, you know, at first glance, the greatest need and the gap for preservation conservation is in the lower reaches of the the Mississippi River and in the Carp River watershed. Okay, so acquiring more land. So should we acquire more land for conservation purposes? At present, we own the properties I mentioned, and we lease and license the lands I mentioned from the City of Ottawa and OPG. But acquisition under the regulation can also include conservation agreements if we had a long-term agreement to manage and protect the land on behalf of the landowner. It could also include a land or forest management agreement, like a contracted service that we have with County of Lanark, for example. And it can include stewardship agreements. So these tend to be much shorter and related to grants such as Rural Clean Water, ALICE, and Trees Ontario, Trees Canada. Now, technically speaking, that last one, it's not really acquiring, but we have an interest in an agreement on a property. We would never show those on our land inventory. And even the ones that we manage under contracted services, we don't show on our land inventory. The only ones we've shown on that land inventory are the ones we own, where we have a lease or license agreement, and our conservation agreement, where we have a long-term interest. So, as I've just mentioned, there are others operating in this space, but there's also other programs that incent people to keep their own land, but manage it actively for conservation purposes. So the two I wanted to highlight here are the Conservation Lands Tax Incentive Program and the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program. So in our jurisdiction, we're aware that a lot of landowners who have forests and wetlands on their properties are participating in those programs. And they are, in fact, some of the largest stewards in our jurisdiction are these private landowners who are participating in those tax incentive programs. You saw the map with where other levels of government are, but I guess we would feel that there's an opportunity for growth in all of these, but it's a question of where and how. So I have a question here from Lucy. Do you have a contract for land and forest management with private landowners? Not currently. No, we do not. Just the county of Lanark, but we do have that conservation agreement with the Ontario Heritage Trust for that Appleton property, which I believe we would consider private property on a technicality sort of thing. So, are there any questions on this or comments on this before we move into the questions on this matter? Nope. Nope. Okay, so Kelly, if you want to launch the next question. So we're looking to whether or not we want MVCA should be buying more land, and if so, for what purpose? And I said buying, but this question says acquiring, and it should be acquiring. I correct myself. It could be through any of these land management approaches. So you can see it's multiple choice. You can choose whichever, all or none, as you wish. John Carroll, I note you have a question or comment. You'll have to unmute yourself, John.
Is that better?
Yes.
So I don't find a lot of these questions mutually exclusive,
That's right.
and that's my challenge. So I'm I'm kind of wondering whether or not this maybe is a better one for multiple choice.
Well, you can choose more than one.
Oh, you can.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
all right.
Yes.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Just give it a few more seconds here, allow people to finalize their choices. Okay, are we at 8%? Okay, great. We're going to end the poll here. So, interesting mix. And we do have some folks who feel that MVCA should not be acquiring more land. So, why don't we try to hear from people who have commented on all of these? So let's start at the top. Is there anybody who said that they believe MVCA should acquire land to increase public access to natural heritage areas? Is there anybody want to put up their hand or offer a comment in the chat room on why they feel that this is a role MVCA should play? No? Okay. All right. We'll go on to the next one. Is there anybody who would like to support or speak to why they feel MVCA should acquire land to protect ecological values and functions? No hands raised? No comments?
John Beats.
Oh, John Viets, if you want to go ahead, if you unmute.
Yeah, so as I was listening to you speak, I realized that my mind had made a connection between increasing public access to natural heritage areas and protecting ecological values. I see the first as an opportunity for education, and the second as an example of that education, having some effect because people would be more aware of the functions and value and not disrupt it so much. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. We have a comment from Stephen who says the public can never have too much access to nature. It's a lovely thought. Thank you, Stephen. Is there any other questions, hands, comments? Nope. Okay. So, Stephen, you've put up your hand?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I thought, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay. One of the reasons I thought MVCA could have a role is that in some of the downstream areas and some of the lower parts of the watershed, I'm with the Mississippi Madawaska Land Trust, and for the most part, acquisition of those lands is kind of out of our reach, just because of the cost. They tend to get more expensive the nearer you get to the nearer you get to the urban areas, and some of the other ways of protecting land. So far, from what I've been able to notice, we aren't very good at, or we don't have a lot of experience at some of the, the land and forest management agreements, leases and license and stewardship agreements, those kinds of things. It seems to me that MVCA might be in a better place to know where those might work and to make them happen.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you sharing that, Stephen. So the next item, the question we had in those four, I'm just going to ask Rachel if I could see your screen here. So hydrologic functions in the watershed. Does anybody want to speak to that item? Or offer a comment in the chat room? No? No hands, okay. So then lastly, we have, I think, 3 or 4 folks who've commented, or maybe more, on that MVCA shouldn't acquire more land. So if any of you are comfortable, if you could raise your hand or provide a comment in the chat room. No comments? No, okay. So I know that as you see here, you know, there are others operating in this space, and the provincial regulation is quite clear that each CA has to decide for itself, given its geography and local circumstances, how much it wants to get into the land acquisition and conservation preservation business. So that's why we've posed this question and are looking for the feedback. And status quo is an acceptable answer if that's what the community, you know, wants us to do, and that's why we're engaging in this this conversation. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next theme, which is facility types. Oh, do we have a further comment? So we have a comment from Stephen Blight. I don't want to take up too much airtime, but MVCA is the best, or to know the land for protecting hydrological functions. I tend to agree with you there. Probably there's some federal agencies that could weigh in on that as well, but definitely at the local level, we're probably best positioned on the hydrological front to comment on that. Okay, so we're going to get into facility types now. The overall question being, what types of facilities should MVCA operate? So right now, of course, we have various passive recreation facilities. We also have some active recreation, basketball courts, playgrounds, and active recreation also includes our programs and services. So anything that requires an MVCA employee to be in attendance is considered an active recreation program under the regulation. And that includes our cultural and heritage facilities. So the museum, the education center, the gatehouse, the picnic shelter, the cloister, those are all considered active recreation under the regulation and category 3 programs and services. So I hope it's not too confusing, the nomenclature, but so these are the scope of facilities that we have today. But other conservation authorities operate other types of and own other types of properties. So some of them own and manage forests. They manage portage routes, and historically MVCA used to do that. We have any number of portage routes along the Mississippi River. Some of our signage still exists, and it dates back to the 80s, the early 90s. Some CAs have scenic lookouts and rest spots, often, you know, on a major highway next to a river. Those, there are some that have major properties where they have campsites and campgrounds, and some have boat launches, and though I didn't list it here, some even have marinas. So, and ski hills and all sorts of other things. So it really varies across Ontario, the types of facilities that conservation authorities own and operate. But as you can tell, as you get into all these other types of uses, there's more and more people operating in this space, not least of whom is the private sector. So we haven't mapped, but we're certainly aware of any number of private businesses that operate campgrounds, you know, places where people can park their trailers, etc. Most boat launches, mind you, are owned by the local municipalities or by those private facilities that are operating cottages and the like. There is nobody at present managing in any sort of form the portage routes. Because we still have signage out there, people still call us about the portage route, but those are largely on either Crown or private land. And so we don't have necessarily active relationships with all those folks. But the question is, I guess, in the greater sense, do we want to maintain that portage route going forward? And if so, who, if not MVCA, might take a leadership role? Or do we not want to manage that going forward collectively as a community? And that's an okay response as well. So I'm going to ask Kelly to put up the next question so that we can start to engage in conversation on this. So we're thinking over the next 10 to 20 years. So think of this in, as a long-term vision for the organization. This is certainly not something that we're going to be running with in the immediate future. But when you think about over the next 10 to 20 years, what kind of properties, facilities do you think that MVCA should own and operate? Or let's just say operate, because the ownership is another matter.
Choice.
So again, this is a multiple choice, so you can select all and any that you feel are appropriate. Just so everybody knows, we tend to wait until we've heard back from about 75 to 80% of you before we close the poll. So, but that said, take your time. Don't want to rush you. And we're doing well for time. So we still have 35 minutes on the clock. So after we're finished going through these 5 topics, if there's time left over, happy to open the floor to general discussion and Q&A. Great. I'm glad to see that most of you feel that we should continue the natural heritage. It's interesting that not everybody feels that we should continue with the cultural heritage sites. And of course, that is a question we're going to be getting to in more detail. Linear parks, I'm just going to make the comment, if you don't already know, I should have probably said something earlier. We are actively in the process of divesting of our 35 kilometers of the KMP Trail to the counties. The counties of Renfrew, Lanark, and Frontenac are developing quite an integrated rail trail network. And they have funds set aside for that purpose to enhance the old rail beds and bring them up to a common standard. And we are hopeful that by the end of this year, we'll be able to turn over that asset, at least in the operational sense, to the counties so that they can begin work on bringing our section of the KMP up to the standard that the other rail trails are in. So interesting results. So I'm going to ask if anybody, I noticed 48% beaches. I have to admit, I'm a bit surprised at that. Would anybody like to speak to who voted in favor of beaches? Any chat? How about the portage routes? We had several people, just over a third of you identify the portage routes. John Crow, if you want to unmute.
I think a more interesting response, Sally, is the question on managed forests.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether or not that's, I know MVCA has done a fantastic job and a very collaborative job, but really, is that necessarily the future?
Mhm. Do you have a thought on that matter?
I do.
Would you like to share?
Well, absolutely. Why is MVCA the best position to do that? And I'm not certain. So I would be looking for an argument that says we should continue to do that and the resources that it takes to deliver on it.
Mhm. Okay. I can fill some folks in a bit on the work that we do for Lanark County today. So we've supported the county for, I'm not sure how many years now. I think it's many years, like at least a decade, maybe 2 or 3, with its management, the management of its forests. So just a bit of history. You know, the Lanark Forest was planted under a massive program that M&R used to run. You know, they were planting over 1 million trees a year under that program back in, I'm going to say, the 60s and 70s. And of course, as the forest matured, you know, need for ongoing management of those lands became necessary. But unfortunately, at a certain point, the province got out of that business, and at that time, the county approached MVCA to support it in these activities. And we have, to this day, a person who used to work for M&R who supports the county in doing that work. I think one of the questions that's in forestry sector generally in Eastern Ontario needs to be addressing is, are we readying the next generation to take over from where we're leaving off as those M&R folks retire from the work that they've been doing? Is there another generation of people to take their place in terms of actively managing forests? So I don't think there's an easy answer to your question, because I think it's part of a much broader question about forest management in Eastern Ontario. I noticed that we had some folks speak in favor of some of these other things, like scenic lookouts, campsites, boat launches. Is there anybody who would like to speak to any of those? So Lucy, you're asking the question, are you speaking about the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program? Not specifically. So that is a program that's available to private landowners. Truth be told, I don't know whether it's available to the county. Intuitively, I want to say no, but I could be entirely wrong on that. When I say managed forests, I mean we could potentially do it as a fee-for-service program, as we're doing for the county, for private landowners. And under that, they would be entitled, if they have the forest management plan, to that tax incentive. So that is a definite possibility. Are any other questions or comments or hands raised? No? Okay. All right. If you want to go on to the next question. Oh, Matt was asking why I thought the 48% for beaches was surprising. I don't know. I don't know why I think it's surprising. I guess I hadn't thought of it as something that people would be looking to the CA for. I guess that would be my only response. I put it there because other CAs do it. I hadn't really thought that people would be looking to the CA to deliver that in our jurisdiction. So it is an interesting response for me. Janice Arthur, you have your hand up if you want to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I've been quite involved with the beach at Palmerston Cananto,
Oh, yes.
and I know that there are, let's say, legal issues involved with it. It would be wonderful if that were clarified. That beach has great erosion problems because it's on an extreme slope. And we did a lot to try and mitigate that, but it's still, the rain this spring has been phenomenal. So not much is being done to mitigate that erosion. And I know there is already a cooperation between MVCA and North Frontenac to maintain that beach, but the areas of responsibility are not really very clear. At any rate, I appreciate that MVCA has held that land for so long and protects it to always be in public hands. But it would be wonderful if there was some clarity about what's going to happen.
Okay, I can share the latest with you. Just for those who aren't familiar, Palmerston Beach is part of our Palmerston Cananto Conservation Area. And as indicated, we've had a shared service agreement with North Frontenac for many years now, where they operate, maintain the beach, but they've been reticent to put significant investment in it until they own it. And so we also have a long-term agreement in place with North Frontenac that ultimately we would turn that beach over to them to manage, own and manage. As mentioned, there have been some legal hurdles to go through that have taken an inordinate amount of time to address. We're hopeful that we're coming down the home stretch there, but I'm not going to promise any dates on this just because it's been such a drawn out process. So thank you for your comment on that. So if we want to move on to the next question, unless there's any other hands or comments. Nope. Okay. Oh, so the results. Oh, you've already. Oh, how come I don't have those up on mine? Stop. Sure. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So do you think MVCA should transfer the museum collection and its management to a heritage organization? So interesting. It's I'm going to say almost a 50-50, but it would seem that more of you feel that we should than that we shouldn't. So we knew that this would be of significant interest to many people on the line. So would somebody like to begin the discussion? Do we have anybody who wants us to maintain the current collection, management of the collection, to speak in favor of us retaining the collection? No? How about people who feel we should transfer management of it to somebody else? Is there anybody who wants to provide comment on why they feel? We have a comment. Can you outline what management means? And that's from Lucy. Okay, so this comes up a bit in the discussion paper, but more fully in the current state report. when we look at most of the museums in our jurisdiction, most of them are governed by an independent board that's a not-for-profit organization simply focused on managing that museum, whichever museum it is. So we're unique in that the museum at the Milliken Tail is managed by a conservation authority board. And therefore it falls under our budget, it's our audits, it's our corporate priorities, you know, and plans that that facility is operated under. But it also means that, you know, when I spoke earlier of going out to all our member municipalities in the last year to sign on for agreements for category 2 and 3 programming, that all of them were asked to fund that museum. That is not an avenue that most museums in our watershed have at their disposal. Most of them will absolutely solicit funding from their local municipality, but they're not typically soliciting funding from adjacent municipalities. So it is unique that the Milliken Tail Museum receives funding not only from its local municipality, which is Mississippi Mills, but also from all other municipalities within the watershed. Now, as a museum representing the history and lives and successes and accomplishments of nationally recognized Canadians, I have no problem justifying why that's the case, but it does make it different from all the other museums like the Middleville Museum, etc., the North Lanark Museum and others within the watershed. Are there related questions on this or comments? Stephen Blight, you want to unmute and offer comment or question?
Yes, I will. Just briefly, I was one of those who voted perhaps it might be better transferred to a heritage organization. I mean, I think the museum is great. I like it. But it just makes me wonder whether or not the conservation authority is the best organization to do it, especially when you're, I assume, and this may be wrong, but I assume that you're looking to streamline your operations a little bit. This seems like, I mean, I'm not questioning whether it should be done at all. I think it's a great thing to do, but whether the conservation authority should be doing it. And it just doesn't, if you're looking for things to change, this might be a good candidate.
Right, right. Does anybody want to respond to Stephen's comments or offer other questions or comments on this? Okay. Okay, so let's go on to the next question then. So this tackles the portage routes, and we post this one because it's a bit of a tricky one actually, and I'm just curious. This is one where, you know, we could pose any number of questions as part of the discussion paper, but this one, pardon me, is one of those of, it's kind of an outlier, but it comes up regularly. So we are looking for feedback on this. Okay, this is quite interesting. Does somebody who was voted in favor of us managing portage routes, does somebody feel comfortable unmuting and speaking to the item, or for offering some comments in the chat room.
Lucy Carlton.
Lucy and then Stephen. So Lucy, if you want to unmute.
Yes, just in reference to your earlier slide, when you were showing the pressures from urban areas for people to get out of the cities to for recreation, I think this would certainly be a reason why maintaining portage routes for day trippers or canoe paddlers just out for the day, or even for overnight camping. To me, it would seem a very sensible area that you should maintain. Thanks.
Super. Thanks, Lucy. Stephen, do you want to unmute? Or you
I think
are?
I am unmuted.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Sorry for taking up more time, but it seems I've been on the Mississippi quite a bit in a kayak and a canoe, and I've often wondered about the portage routes. And it seems to me that since it crosses so many jurisdictional boundaries, if anybody is going to maintain the portage routes, I think probably the Conservation Authority is in the sort of best cross-jurisdictional position to do that. I mean, if you left it to each township, there would be gaps and service would come and go as different priorities change. It seems to me that the Conservation Authorities Conservation Authority would be a well placed to do it. The other thing that makes me think, because nobody maintains them now, they're not always in great shape, and not necessarily from a use perspective, but they're getting kind of messy, and people are camping on private lands, and it's just kind of a little bit unmanaged right now. And it seems to me that managing the portage would be a good thing, and the CA would be a good organization to do it.
Okay, thank you for that, Stephen. We've had a question from Roger. Please specify where the portages are and scenic outlooks. So, we do have a map online that we can share. Our crew here behind the scenes will try to find that and upload it to the chat room, so that Roger, you and others can see the portage route. We don't have any scenic lookouts at present. It would be something that if we were tasked with looking at that opportunity, we would, definitely assess where in the watershed would be most appropriate to establish one or more of those sites. Do we have any other? Yes. Oh, you have already? Ah, well done. So if you look at the chat, you'll see the canoe route, and it identifies the portage location. So there you go. Thank you, Rachel. Any other hands raised or questions? Nope, we're good. Okay, if we could go on to the next question then. Oh, okay. So I've just been prompted that those are the last of the questions on that. So we're at permitted uses, and I'm looking at the clock here. I'm going to actually have to pick up the speed here. Okay, so what type of uses should MVCA permit at its conservation areas? So in addition to all those ones we saw under the previous slide, we also have facilities basically maintained by others, or programs delivered by others. So there's the observatory at the Milliken Tail. Both the Men's Shed and the Ramsey Women's Institute have programming that they deliver at our site. The Mississippi Field Naturalist Club and certainly local scouts and guide groups deliver programming at our Milliken Tail site. This year, we've reinstituted our summer camp program, and it's been tremendous success. Just so everybody knows, we're getting pressure to open up another week, which is wonderful. And then over time, we've also rented the facility for races, for festivals, for people to film movies, etc. So that's how we use the site, Milliken Tail, and our other sites at present. But certainly we've been approached for other uses, and you can see some of the other uses at other conservation authorities. Just so you know, this past winter, we started consultations about potential cross-country ski trails with the local cross-country ski groups, and we're sort of assessing the property. Some of these things, though, of course, could be impacted by climate change, so it's something for us to think about. But you can see the various activities that some conservation authorities allow to be carried out at their areas. The last one in that list, native tree and plant nurseries. Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority has a volunteer group that's what they do, is they maintain a nursery and do fundraising by selling native species of wildflowers and trees and shrubs for homeowners. Lisa's added, what about a forest school? So that's absolutely another option. Ganaraska Conservation Authority manages a forest school. I think RBCA does as well. They might not call it that, but yeah. So, but of course, there are others operating in this space, you know, certainly tree trekking and zip lining, the private sector's, you know, doing that, watercraft rentals. So, you know, music and related entertainment, there's other venues within the jurisdiction, and it's a question of, do we think it's an appropriate use and at our sites? And is there a need for it within our jurisdiction? So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to upload the first question. So we're looking for initially, you know, how do you feel about a mix of passive and active recreation? Because most of the ones at other that we listed being carried out at other conservation areas are largely active recreation, you know, that would require additional investment of time and monies and potentially staff on site to manage. So that's how we're using active recreation. So in the comment section, we have folks pointing out that yes, forest schools are definitely at other CAs and popular, and we also have from strong opinions about ziplining. Okay, super. So that's interesting. Okay, so people are generally supportive of a mix of passive and active recreation. That's great to see. Okay, so if we want to upload the next question then. So of those various activities, if you could just comment on whether or not which ones you think are appropriate, and if you are those that you want to speak in favor of under other or other comments, then you can add them under question 2. Thank you, Mary Lynn, for that very nice comment under the chat room. Appreciate it. MVCA staff worked very hard to make that Milliken Tail site as wonderful as it is. I'll just allow a few more seconds here for people to okay, yeah, let's just end. Okay, so an important thing to recognize and these results, the percentages are of those who voted. So how many people do we still have on the line here? 23. So we have 23 total participants, but on this survey, only 14 participated. So just so you know how the percentages are working here, it's not of everybody on the call, but everybody who responded. Okay, well, interesting about the native tree and plant nursery. As a gardener who it's all over this, I love that. That's lovely to see, actually. Nice. Interesting ice rinks and groom cross-country skate trails. Well, I would be interested in hearing from folks who want to speak in favor or against the mountain bike trails, the watercraft rentals, and the music and related entertainment, because some of you voted for it, but a lot of you didn't. So is there anybody who would be willing to speak in favor or against those? Either put your hand up or offer something in the chat room if you're comfortable. No? Okay, well, then we'll move right along because we're running out of time very quickly. And was that our last question for? Yep, okay. So, do you think MVCA should consider acquiring one or more properties where a broader range of active recreational activities could be provided? So for instance, those of you who said beach or similar type things, you know, do you actually think we should acquire property? And again, acquiring under the regulation has a very broad definition. It can include owning. It could include lease or licensing, other sort of partnership, shared agreement kind of arrangement, or an easement agreement, for example. Great. Okay, so most of you feel that we shouldn't be purchasing property or have no comment on whether we should purchase property for recreation, active recreational activities. Okay, so I guess I'm just going to pose the question, does that, so what I'm hearing then, based upon the earlier survey questions about acquiring property, so that while many of you thought we should be acquiring land for conservation or preservation, hydrological, ecological values, you don't necessarily think we should be acquiring property with a view for active recreation. If I've misunderstood, you know, or if people want to qualify my interpretation of the results, please put up your hand or provide something in the comment section to clarify your thinking on this, because this is like really important stuff for me to understand, you know, these nuances in public opinion on where people feel MVCA should be investing its resources and putting its priorities. John Crow, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment for yes, but from a mandate point of view, no. It's just not on the cards.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, John. Did you have another one here? Okay, so we had an offline question by one of the participants that we just needed to get an answer to. So that thank you, John, for that comment. That was helpful. Is there anybody else that wants to provide a comment or has a chat room comment on? Stephen has said my interpretation is correct, for at least for him. So thank you, Stephen, for confirming my interpretation. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the last section. So if you want to close that, we'll move on to water control infrastructure. I'm looking at the time. Wow, earlier I thought we had all the time in the world, and this says 2 minutes. So I'm going to hope that some of you can stay on the line a little bit longer while we deal with this question. So how should MVCA approach the acquisition and use of water control structures? So I generally characterize how we came to own these various dam and water control structures as ad hoc. It was on, I'll say, an opportunistic basis as municipalities came to us, or the province made a recommendation, etc. So all 12 of our structures were acquired between 73 and 1990 at a time when MVCA was 85% funded by the province. So in other words, when we were taking on these assets, we weren't taking on as huge a financial liability as they pose to the organization today. Today, we get less than 3% of our operating and maintenance funds from the province and a maximum of 50% when we need to do capital renewal at a property. And that's because not all the dams meet all the criteria for the funding. So as I mentioned previously, most of them lie on Crown land or must be accessed by Crown or municipal or private land. So there are land management issues associated with almost every single dam. And especially since some of them date back over 100 years, they don't have legal surveys. Titles are descriptive. and in some cases regarding landmarks that may not even exist any longer. So it can be challenging from a land management perspective to own and operate water control structures, not least of which the financial and liability associated with owning and managing water control infrastructure. So the structures that we own today are either for flood control, and that means that they have sufficient reservoir capacity that when we operate them, they have a meaningful impact on water levels upstream and downstream. Flood mitigation means they have some reservoir capacity, but probably localized, that their influence on overall flows and levels in the system are not huge, but they definitely would have an impact on the local area. Habitat management, several of our dams are managed to protect spawning areas. So we time when we operate those dams to make sure that it's conducive to protecting spawning beds. And then lastly, there's 2 of our facilities that are solely operated to provide recreational water levels on the 2 lakes affected. We don't own any hydro generating facilities, but we certainly operate High Falls, which is owned by, pardon me, OPG for that purpose. And there are other dams on the main stem of the river that are hydro generating, but we don't have any involvement with them other than obviously as control structure operators on the water. We are in regular communication with those other organizations. We do, as I mentioned earlier, also operate facilities owned by M&R. Most of them are very small facilities, and again, they have localized benefits, but not necessarily at a watershed level. So if we want to put up the first question here. So, so most of you believe we should permit hydro development at our dams where feasible and cost effective. So we do have a few people though who felt that we shouldn't. So I'd be interested in just hearing some thoughts from either side. Is there anybody who wants to offer comment? So we have a comment from Stephen. I would say yes to this question if there is no incremental ecological damage. Stephen, I'm just curious, how did you answer? Because you say you would say yes. So did you say no or no comment? Just curious.
I actually didn't answer because I was too busy
Okay.
writing this.
Fair enough. Good. Okay. Yes. So I'll just give you anecdotally a comment on that. All of our dams are run of the river, meaning that it's not a full holding back of flow. And that would include all of the hydro generating dams on the river as well. All of them have a bypass that allows water to bypass the dam. To varying degrees, do they permit fish to go upstream? I have had conversations about our biologist on that, and I don't want to misquote her, but I do believe she said that the type of fish that would typically go upstream aren't inclined to go beyond where they already do in most instances. But I'm not going to say it's all instances, but I know that it's not as big an issue as it might be in different habitats, different species. But I'll certainly follow up with her on that. Is there any other questions, comments on people speaking in favor or against allowing hydro at one or more of our dams? No? Okay, let's go on to the next question then. Oh, John, you have your hand up?
Sorry, I do. One exception, Sally, is eels. And that is an issue that's within the watershed, also for the Ottawa River. So that's a question that Kelly is very conversant with.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I wasn't being categorical. I recall her saying they can get up to High Falls, but not beyond that. And then I can't remember what she said, whether they would be inclined to or need to or not. So I'm going to have to refresh my own memory on that. But thank you. That's
Fair
it.
enough. Yeah.
We have a question from Kathy. What is the relationship between MVCA and the Ottawa River Regulatory Planning Board? Who has the mandate to manage water levels and flows? Water levels and flows on the Ottawa River are controlled by that organization in partnership with the dam owners. So on the Ontario side, it's primarily OPG, but definitely that federal entity, and they're basically a division of environment and climate control. What do they call themselves? Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC. So that's what that organization is a division of. That's basically an arm of the government, federal government. And they coordinate between the two provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and the dam operators on both sides of the river and on the river to control flows on the and levels on the Ottawa River. That said, most of the Ottawa River watershed is unregulated. So just like our watershed is mostly unregulated, we have way more land draining, way more water than we could hope to manage with just the reservoirs we have. The Ottawa River is similar, but on a much larger scale. So they manage it within the confines of the geography and the limits of those dams. Do we have results? Okay, should MVCA build or assume ownership of facilities whose primary purpose is hydro? So most of you don't think we should be in that business or have no thoughts on it. I'm curious, the one person who thought, or two people who thought we should, do you feel comfortable speaking in favor, or why you felt we should consider that? No hands up, no? Okay. The one thing I would put out to you is so, and we get into this a bit in the discussion, not the discussion paper, the current state report. At various times, the province has indicated that it might divest one or more of its structures. The other structures in the watershed are all privately owned. And given that historically, most of the dams we own and operate today were built by others, it is a question that's been posed to the authority previously. And in almost all instances, we took over those assets. So that's, if you're wondering why we're posing this question, is because I'm not ruling out the possibility that at some time in future, MVCA may be asked to assume ownership of another structure in the watershed. Okay, let's move on to the last question. I think it is second to last. Oh, pardon me. Should MVCA build or assume ownership of facilities whose primary purpose is to maintain recreational water levels? So I mentioned that there are two facilities that were purpose-built to maintain recreational water levels. Is that a business area that we should be in going forward in terms of building more or assuming ownership of those types of facilities? Okie doke. So it looks like most of you feel we shouldn't or have no comment on it. Again, I would ask for those of you who feel that we should, if you feel comfortable, we'd like to hear from you on why you think that should be the case. If you want to put up your hand or offer comment. Okay, so Stephen Blight has said, I think you are stuck with those that you currently have, but I wouldn't take on new ones. And Kenneth asks, what dams are considered recreational? So there's two of them. It's the Farm Lake Dam and the Bennett Lake Dam. Those dams were specifically built to maintain recreational lake levels. Is there any other question? Oh, Mary Lynn, if you want to unmute. You'll have to unmute yourself, Mary Lynn. We can't hear you.
Okay. What about, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. What about the Kenoto Lake Dam? Because I know back in '64, the logging dams had fallen apart and the water was 3 feet lower. So I believe it's been maintained at that higher level now, which is certainly good. So is that considered one of those spots that Mississippi Valley maintains for recreational purposes?
It may have a dual purpose. So it's quite conceivable that we might maintain it for recreational purposes, but it serves another function as well. The other thing is Kenoto Lake Dam is owned by MNRF, so we operate a contract to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so any other questions or comments on that one? Okay, so we're going to go to the last question under water control infrastructure. And I appreciate everybody who's been able to stay on the line with us. Sorry that we've taken longer, but good discussion and comments. So basically what this is asking is, should we be thinking about cost recovery differently depending on the function of a dam? The primary function of a dam. And again, as people complete the question, if you want to offer any comments on why in the comment section in the chat room, that would be great. Okay, so most of you feel that we should have a different type of funding model depending on the primary function of a dam. Okay. So just so you know where this is coming from is definitely the new regulations speak to that conservation authorities should be contemplating whether or not the function of their assets and the programs and services that they're delivering are equally shared across their jurisdiction, or if there are some jurisdiction, areas of the watershed that are disproportionately benefiting from a conservation authority program, service, asset, that sort of thing. Okay, so thank you for that. So I'll just quickly sum up the next. Oh, did we have a comment? So Stephen Blight, I think if only for recreation, then the recipients of the service should pay. But good luck getting them to pay. Flood control is a public good, so okay to pay. Okay, thank you for that, Stephen. So, so next steps, if you haven't done so already, please review our discussion paper, and if you're able to spend some time with the current state report, it has a lot more information, and complete our online survey, because we really do want to hear from everybody and share that information, with others who you think might have an interest in the future of the watershed and the work of the Conservation Authority. If you want to get future updates on this project and other activities, just email us and we can add you to our mailing list. And if there's things that you want to follow up with us on based upon today's conversation or subsequently, just email us as well. And if you can just put in the read line, land conservation strategy, it'll help us make sure it gets to the right person in a timely manner. So as I mentioned off the top, the comment period is the first week of September, September 6th. So you have lots of time, but don't delay and forget about it. But mark your calendars. And we, of course, will receive anything between now and then and begin our analysis. But then the next step will be is once we get the feedback from the community and have a sense of where people think we should be putting our priorities, we're going to start to draft the document. And so my goal is to get it to our board and out to the public in October, and then get some further feedback and bring a final document to the board for approval by the end of the year in December, which is the provincial deadline. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we do have a last question or two for you regarding the information session. So if you wouldn't mind just completing that before you log off. And while you're doing that, I'd just like to thank you all for participating today. I really appreciate that you took the 2+ hours out of your day to participate in this. And I encourage you to share as candidly as you wish, feedback on what we did right or wrong with this information session, and what you think areas we could improve going forward. And of course, let us know your comments on the project just generally, and where we're heading as an organization. So I look forward to getting feedback from all of you on not just this session, but on the project as a whole. So thank you very much for your time today. And as you complete the questionnaire, you're free to log off. We'll stay until you're all gone. So have a good day, everybody. Take care.